On this edition of Southern Newsweek, a pair of teenage cyclists from Wanaka are set to race in Europe, an historic Alexandra church is strengthened for the future, and a horse riding event in Gore goes ahead while others are cancelled. Kia ora, I'm Phil Vaughan. Two teenagers from Wanaka are preparing to travel to Europe for the Downhill Mountain Bike World Cup Tour and Crankworx races. The pair are among New Zealand's top youth riders and are keen to prove themselves on the international circuit.
Preparing to race against the best overseas talent, Wanaka teenagers Kalani Muirhead and Nico Arnold are getting ready to compete in top-level downhill mountain bike events in Europe this year. The pair will join 7 other self-funded riders from New Zealand, battling against some of the world's top sponsored mountain bikers.
And I'm mainly going to be competing downhill, so that'll be doing World Cups. I'm also going to be going over to do one EWS, which is an enduro, and I think hopefully I'm going to go over and do one Crankworx as well.
Both riders are highly ranked in New Zealand, and Muirhead says they've been saving up for this chance to travel to Scotland, Austria and Italy to show the rest of the world what they're capable of.
I think we're pretty excited. I've been planning it for quite a while and watching it on TV, so it'll be nice to be over there, I guess.
The borders are now reopening for travel, and Arnold is confident COVID-19 will be less of an issue when they race against riders from across the globe.
I think it definitely has an effect on us and our travels, but I think we've been living with COVID for long enough to say that we're pretty used to it and can kind of just get through it without too much trouble.
The duo are set to leave in May for the 4-month downhill tour, returning home at the end of the Northern Hemisphere summer with a lot more experience under their wheels. In Wanaka, the South Today.
Otago University's Tourism Policy School is being conducted online this year. Tourism Minister Stuart Nash zoomed in for his address and says re-establishing trans-Tasman tourism is vitally important. From the middle of next month, fully vaccinated Australians will be able to visit Aotearoa, with most other global tourists welcome from May.
Stuart Nash is encouraging tourism operators to get amongst it as they ready themselves for an influx of Australian tourists in a few weeks' time.
But where we are targeting that, and I've always been very clear about this, is the high value tourist. Now please don't confuse high value with high net worth. The high value tourist is the tourist who comes over, they eat in the Queenstown restaurant, they go to the vineyards, they do the experiences.
Nash cracked the whip in his opening address at Otago University's Tourism Policy School Conference, which is being held online this year. His speech covered issues around structural change for regenerative tourism. The Tourism Minister visited Queenstown recently after border changes were announced by the government and was singing the resort's praises.
This will always be one of the premier tourist destinations in the world. But we do know we do need to build a little bit of resilience, hence the reason why we are working very closely with the businessmen and women of the region to ensure we actually get that right in true partnership.
During his Tourism Policy School address, Nash encouraged tourism operators to look after workers by paying them a decent amount of money. He was optimistic about the opportunities around border reopenings between Australia on April the 12th, as well as for many other major countries including the US and UK from May the 1st. Nash insists Tourism NZ has been busy while the nation's borders were closed.
Please don't underestimate the amount of work and innovative time that Tourism New Zealand has spent over the last 2 years, keeping the brand aspiration alive and building Brand New Zealand. What they've now got to do is translate that aspiration into action, and Tourism New Zealand is doing some fantastic work there.
He recognised tourism businesses had really done it tough during 2 years of COVID-19 restrictions. But he said the industry needs to now make a concerted effort to live the nation's brand. NZ Ski CEO Paul Anderson told the conference tourism should not be treated like a problem which needs to be fixed. He wants government funding to change so infrastructure investment considers both local and visitor populations. Pre-COVID, tourism was New Zealand's largest export industry, with $40.9 billion. About half the jobs in the Queenstown Lakes district are in that sector. Those in tourism and hospitality are looking forward to turning these closed signs around to open once more. In Dunedin, the South Today.
An historic stone church in central Otago is getting a makeover. St Enoch's Church in Alexandra is being strengthened after a survey 6 years ago found it had a low earthquake rating.
Nearly 150 years old and being saved for another century or two. St Enoch's Church in Alexandra is undergoing earthquake strengthening. Parish Minister Reverend Andrew Howley says an assessment 6 years ago identified the building as having a low rating when compared to new building standards.
We found it to be reasonably low, being a stone building. We didn't have to do something, we didn't have to close the doors instantly, but we weren't happy to live with that.
These days the church is a union between the local Presbyterian and Methodist churches, but it originally started off as just a Presbyterian church back in 1877.
At the time, Presbyterian denomination was the strongest probably in this area. At one time the parish had some 2,000 odd members.
Howley says the building has been there for the significant milestones in many people's lives.
This is a place where people baptise their children. This is a place where people commit to their faith. It's a place that people are married. I myself was married here. This is a place where we also bury our loved ones from. So whether or not we're people of faith or not, it's a place that a lot of people have connections with and strong emotional ties to.
In addition to earthquake strengthening, a new fire alarm and emergency lighting system is also being installed. The work is set to cost around $120,000 and is funded through a number of grants and donations. In Alexandra, the South Today.
While many horse riding events have been cancelled due to COVID-19, more than 70 riders have been able to compete in Gore. The competition, described as an express event, saw riders competing in dressage and show jumping disciplines.
Giving their all on the track, the Gore racecourse hosted horses and riders recently for a day in the sun. The express event is a streamlined version of a regular eventing competition and was held in response to COVID-19 traffic light settings. Both the show jumping and cross-country courses are shortened, meaning less officials are needed, and the event is quicker to finish.
Yeah, well, people are liking the express events because they can come and don't have to spend too much time here, and they can just leave and they don't have to do anything. So when we go back to running full events, they're going to be spoilt and having to stay all day and help.
74 riders took part in the day, enjoying a chance to get out and compete alongside others.
Today was great. It was good to get out and do something different rather than show jumping. And yeah, had a bit of success on case. It went well.
I had a pretty good dressage, good show jumping and good cross country.
Full show jumping and dressage events have had to be cancelled this season, but because eventing is held in a larger area, it's easier to separate people. In Gore, the South Today.
Still to come after the break on this edition of Southern Newsweek, an 11-year-old Kai Tangata BMX rider is set to compete in Australia, and black-nosed sheep proved to be cute and friendly in Arrowtown. Welcome back. For more than a decade, a Christchurch man has been spreading Star Wars magic to children in need of help and support all around the world. David Britton dresses up as the well-known movie villain Darth Vader, sending personalised video messages to children after being contacted by family or friends.
The Force is strong with this one. For the last 12 years, David Britton has been Canterbury's own Darth Vader. But instead of turning to the dark side, he's using the power of the Force to spread messages of hope and support to young children.
I intend to send a few video messages to some special boys and girls in New Zealand who have impressed the Emperor greatly.
Britton dresses up as the iconic Star Wars character Darth Vader and has sent more than 700 personalised video messages to children all over the world. Many who are dealing with illness, grief, depression, or just struggling with isolation from COVID lockdowns.
We've dealt with kiddies that have lost parents, kiddies that have lost siblings in accidents and all this sort of thing.
He admits he was obsessed with Star Wars from a young age and always wished he could meet the famous movie villain.
When Vader came on screen, you knew instinctively this guy was the villain. There was no mistake.
And 43 years later, he's aiming to show off a gentler side of the character, for a new generation.
For me, it was making them child-friendly. So how do you do that with someone that's, choking people left, right and centre? Once you give them a high five and you kneel down to their height and they can see that you're not this super baddie that they thought you were, it's all good.
Sometimes Darth Vader is called upon to make heartbreaking visits. Last year he visited one Star Wars fan who was on her deathbed with only hours left to live.
I stood beside her and held her hand. The family actually said that was the first time she'd smiled in weeks because of the pain that she was in.
Britton admits he can't solve all the world's problems, but hopes he can spread some unique magic and help make a difference to a child's life, one at a time. In Christchurch, the South Today.
Kai Tangata's BMX club has signed off another successful season at their home track, the final open day meeting of the summer. The director of national competitions was in town to watch the event, with one young racer qualifying to race overseas.
Action on the track at the Kai Tangata Black Gold BMX Club's final meeting of the season. And watching the fast and furious competition with interest was a special guest, BMX NZ National Officiating Director Tony Nelson.
It's an honour for me to be invited down here to Kai Tangata BMX Club to run their Category 10 race meet. It's part of Mainland South. It's a great way to finish our season off. We've had a great season.
The club took 13 riders to the South Island Champs last year, with 7 of the southern members making to finals. Young Ada Begg has been selected for the Mighty 11's international BMX competition next month in Brisbane. The 11-year-old has been racing since she was 3 and has some good reasons for enjoying the sport.
Yeah, making friends in the competition is pretty good as well.
Kai Tangata has a good record in the sport and attracts strong support from local businesses for such a small club. Nelson says the sport is in good health in the district as well as across the country.
The sport is in very good hands with Kai Tangata. It's a big day for them. They've got a rider heading over in 2 weeks' time to the Oceanias to compete for the Mighty 11 title along with the rest of the riders.
The Kai Tangata BMX Club holds regular meetings during the season on Wednesday nights and Saturdays, with a prize giving tomorrow set to round out this season's events. In Kai Tangata, the South Today.
Visitors to Glencoe Station near Arrowtown should be prepared to be mobbed by some very friendly sheep. The flock are sporting distinctive black faces, with the sheep being a Swiss breed known for their inquisitive nature.
In the hills above Arrowtown live what some call the world's cutest sheep. The Valais black-nose breed looks a lot like the kinds of sheep you might see in children's storybooks. Glencoe Station has been breeding Valais sheep for 4 years under the management of experienced farmer John Dagg. He says the sheep are naturally very friendly in nature, with their inquisitive personality making them more at ease with human interaction than your average sheep. The breed get their name from the Valais region in the mountains in Switzerland, so when inland Otago gets its annual snowfalls, the fluffy animals feel right at home. The sheep are crowned with long spiral horns, with rams growing to 80 centimetres tall and weighing up to 130 kilograms. Dagg says his sheep often remind him more of goats, extending their diet from grass to include roughage and bushes as well. The hardy mountain sheep have a thick fleece with a long staple. It grows up to 30 centimetres over 12 months, meaning they get shorn twice a year. Dagg is keen to see the fleece used in more local crafting products once people learn about the friendly animals behind the coarse wool.
Red-billed gulls are still an issue in Oamaru, with the birds continuing to build nests on the rooftops in the centre of town. Now, a group of school children are putting their computer coding classes to good use, creating robotic cats and sharks to try and scare the birds away.
This robotic cat on wheels with laser eyes is just one of a group of robots being built by pupils from St. Joseph's School in Oamaru. The robots are designed to try and scare red-billed gulls off the rooftops in the centre of town, where the birds have been nesting and causing a mess. Over the past 5 years, Oamaru building owners and the council have exhausted several different options to try and discourage the birds from nesting, including roof edge spikes, ozone gas and laser lights. The school classes have tied in lessons about robotics and computer coding with talks on animal behaviour. The resulting creations also include this robotic shark which will open and shut its jaws and move its tail to ward the birds off. And this monster truck robot with spikes and lasers could perhaps drive around rooftops as a way of scaring the gulls away. The mechanics came from Hummingbird robotics kits, with the pupils spending several days working on the programming of the robotic motions. In Oamaru, the South Today.
Still to come after the break on this edition of Southern Newsweek, areas of Lake Hawea Station are replanted with native trees, and we look back at all the COVID-19 milestones of the last 2 years as they affected the South. One of New Zealand's longest operating barber shops is on the market. Hairdresser Selwyn Grave opened up his Moray Place barber shop and tobacconist in 1961. And while he hung up his scissors full-time a few years ago, he believes the time has now come to sell up.
From Governors General to gang members, from the hoi polloi to the hard done by, Selwyn Grave has cut them all.
I've cut some famous people, some All Blacks, some Governor Generals. Used to cut Joan Butcher's hair when she had a haircut, and her husband, or ex-husband.
At 82 years young, Grave figured it was about time to retire, and he's put the well-known Dunedin barbershop on the market. He suffered a stroke a few years ago, and while he's been semi-retired from cutting, he still pops in to keep in touch.
I'm going to miss talking to people, talking to everyone there. You know, I talk to everyone. I love it.
Grave has been a hairdresser since 1954 and has had extensive experience within the industry, opening his first business in 1961.
32 Moray Place where I started off, which Arch McHale, very good. I stayed with him for 7 years. Then I went to Water Street, and which is the old Stock Exchange building. And then I went to 241 Moray Place, which was, and then 276.
The times have changed over the 30 years of Selwyn Grave barbers. The word tobacconist has been blacked out of the sign in Lower Moray Place. Grave isn't entirely sure how many people's hair he's cut over the years.
I wouldn't know, actually. I've never counted up, but I would imagine it must be 1 million probably.
The Dunedin barbershop is being marketed as the snip of the year. And while Selwyn Grave will miss the regular contact with people, he's looking forward to enjoying time with family and being genuinely retired. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A reforestation project on dry and inhospitable land at Lake Hawea Station is starting to take shape. A couple of volunteer tree planters are revegetating a section of their sheep run in an effort to offset their carbon footprint.
Rugged farmland being converted back into native forest. Central Otago Forest and Bird members Evan Alty and Mo Turnbull are checking up on the progress of the native trees they and other volunteers have planted at Lake Hawea Station. They're pleased to see bird life already on the increase in the replanted area.
One thing that I've noticed since we've started planting here is we're now seeing quite a lot of native birds. We had 2 or 3 fantails here and tomtit when I was up here a couple of weeks ago, right. And grey warbler. So some of the native birds, there's a spillover from the Grandview Creek Conservation Area. We're getting some of those birds down here, which is really good.
The pair are also working alongside other volunteers in a predator trapping project at nearby Makarora, but those regular trips have got them thinking about their carbon footprint, which encouraged them to undertake this tree planting project. They're trying to revegetate 2 hectares near Grandview Track. It's inhospitable ground, and nearly every tree planted needs a protective barrier to keep rabbits at bay.
All of the trees have got rabbit protectors on them. Rabbits, along with drought, are the biggest problem up here, but we're pretty lucky. Lake Hawea Station keep on top of their rabbits pretty well, so we've had very little trouble with the rabbit.
The newly planted native trees and shrubs need regular watering to get started, which is a challenge for volunteers to overcome.
A hose reaches most of what we've planted now, and we'll have to think a little bit about that when we plant further up the hill. Particularly pressure will be an issue, and but that's an issue for a later time.
This is just one of several native reforestation projects at Lake Hawea Station. The sheep run is now owned by the Ross family, who sold their successful vodka business called 42 Below for $138 million in 2006. Turnbull's impressed with how the family have turned the station into New Zealand's first carbon-neutral farm.
I would have to say that they've been some of the best people on high country farms that I ever worked with. I spent an entire career travelling around Otago's high country, and some of them can be really grumpy. What do you want? The Rosses are really, really good people to work with.
Lake Hawea Station is also home to several critically endangered species, including grand and Otago skinks and a very rare fish called the Clutha flathead galaxid. At Lake Hawea, the South Today.
2 years ago, the country went into its first lockdown. We finish up this Newsweek by taking a look back at some of the events and changes that shaped the country in the battle against COVID-19.
The situation here is moving at pace, and so must we. We have always said we would act early, decisively, and go hard. And we will.
It's exactly 2 years since Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced to the country the first nationwide lockdown in response to the spread of COVID-19. Nearly all shops and businesses were ordered to be closed, with streets across New Zealand falling empty as all but essential workers stayed at home. Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins gave his first online speech to Dunedin City.
This is hard going, but we're all in this together, and we will get through it together.
The concept of bubbles was new to the population as people stayed at home and tried to focus on the positive, whether that be jamming with neighbours across the street or entertaining residents at a local care home, such as brothers Edwin and William Cubbott.
They absolutely love it. They look forward to it because they come down at afternoon tea time. They look out for them.
Testing stations popped up in major town centres, and just 10 days into the lockdown, the South had 187 confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19. The initial lockdowns proved effective in stamping out the virus in the community, and the country finally moved to alert level 3 after almost a month of lockdown, seeing people queue up for takeaways and coffees on their first new day of freedom. A fortnight later, in mid-May 2020, shoppers flocked to the malls as retail outlets were allowed to reopen. The Dunedin City Council controversially voted to paint George Street with giant coloured dots in an effort to encourage traffic to be alert for pedestrians walking on the road as part of social distancing. By mid-May 2020, planes were able to resume flying visitors from Auckland and Wellington to the hard-hit tourist destination of Queenstown. Mayor Jim Bolt expressed his delight and the hope for Australian visitors to also be able to visit the region for a skiing holiday.
What we really want now is the Trans-Tasman bubble, and we're looking forward to working with the government to try to make that happen.
A managed isolation system was launched in November 2020, but it took until April 2021 for quarantine-free travel from Australia to begin. And that was short-lived, the bubble popping again by mid-July due to the spread of COVID in Australia.
We were flying through Melbourne and all the Melbourne cases happened. We ended up getting on the last flight out of Melbourne before they shut the borders.
The country went back into lockdown by the middle of August last year, with Dunedin's streets once again eerily quiet. As in the first lockdown, people were encouraged to avoid panic buying, with adequate supplies sitting in Dunedin's distribution warehouses.
Heaps of food here, and the team are getting them out the door as on time and everything.
Signing into shops and businesses became mandatory in September 2021. Wearing masks in public became much more commonplace, with some enterprising people selling home-made ones. Vaccinations were off to a slow start, with the elderly first to be vaccinated from the middle of last year. Vaccinations at pharmacies and pop-up clinics for the general population were rolled out a few months later, as the program to immunise the rest of the country against COVID-19 got underway. The government switched to a new traffic light system to control COVID last December. And as the milder Omicron variant nears its peak in New Zealand now, the country is preparing to reopen its borders to the world, starting with Australia in mid-April and other major countries from May. In Dunedin, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news and videos from the Southern region, head online to odt.co.nz and you can follow Channel 39 on YouTube to catch our bulletins all on demand. Nō reira, kia pai te po, ka kite anō.
Public interest journalism funded through New Zealand On Air.